The greatest is gone. Muhammad Ali, three-time heavyweight champion and arguably the world's most famous athlete, died last night at a Phoenix area hospital. He was 74 years old.
Something was off the moment they unsealed the vault. No one expected what lay inside Muhammad Ali's tomb, least of all the scientists who'd fought for 9 years to open it.
Life is real short. What am I going to do in the next 16 years? What's the best thing I can do? Get ready to meet God.
What began as a quiet forensic inquiry has exploded into one of the most baffling posthumous revelations in modern history.
I must be the greatest. I'm the king of the world.
Hold it.
I'm pretty.
Hold it, you're not that pretty.
I'm a bad man. Wait. I shook up the world. I shook up the world.
From preservation anomalies to whispered spiritual theories, the discovery has the world asking, was Ali's final round the most extraordinary of all? What was found inside? It started with a quiet petition, barely covered in the news at first. A coalition of researchers, Islamic scholars, and biologists had been lobbying behind closed doors for years to obtain permission to open Muhammad Ali's tomb. Not for scandal, not for spectacle, but because rumors simply wouldn't die. Some had whispered that Ali's body hadn't decomposed at all. Others claimed strange electromagnetic readings had been picked up near his grave in Cave Hill Cemetery, Kentucky. There were even claims, dismissed by many as conspiratorial nonsense, that his tomb emitted a low-frequency hum, detectable only with specialized equipment. Most people scoffed, but some didn't, and those people had credentials. Eventually, with discreet approval from Ali's surviving family, and in accordance with religious guidelines, the tomb was unsealed under a veil of secrecy. No press, no fanfare, just a team of forensic scientists, pathologists, a few spiritual advisors, and tight security. What they found was unprecedented. Muhammad Ali's body was largely intact, not just in the general preserved sense that you might expect from some form of embalming. Ali was buried according to Islamic tradition, which prohibits embalming and calls for burial within 24 hours of death. No chemicals, no preservatives, and yet there he was. Facial features discernible, skin still pliable in some areas, joints flexible, muscle definition eerily present. A body buried 9 years ago, in Kentucky, in natural earth. One researcher described it as a state of preservation incompatible with known biological processes. Another, a pathologist with over 30 years of experience, was visibly shaken and refused to comment directly. A third, a devout Muslim and biochemist, could only mutter, "Subhanallah," over and over again, an Arabic phrase meaning, "Glory be to God." That alone would have been enough to flood headlines. But then came the objects. Clutched gently in Ali's hands were two unexpected items: a miniature leather boxing glove, no more than 5 inches tall, and a small, worn copy of the Quran. Both items were dry, untouched by decay, and completely out of place. No record of these objects being buried with him exists. No family member remembered placing them. And yet, there they were. The Quran had no mold, no water damage, no yellowing. Its pages were crisp. On the inside cover was a handwritten note, dated 1974, in Ali's unmistakable handwriting. "If I am remembered, let it be as a servant of God." Scientists immediately secured the items for forensic study, but the debate erupted instantly. How did they survive? Who put them there? And what did it all mean? Preservation like this just doesn't happen. According to Dr. Linda Ferruz, a forensic taphonomist who specializes in human decomposition, even in the most ideal natural conditions, dry, cool, and oxygen-poor, you're still looking at soft tissue breakdown within a year. 9 years? This is borderline miraculous. Her team ruled out embalming within days. There were no chemical traces in the tissues, no incisions or indicators of preservation practices. The only explanation they could muster: some bizarre natural anomaly involving the soil composition, coffin material, and perhaps even electromagnetic insulation, though no prior cases even remotely resembled this. Others were less cautious. A fringe physicist speculated about unknown electromagnetic forces in the area. One Islamic scholar suggested the body may be among the awliya, the spiritually elevated, whom, according to some interpretations, God protects from decay. And yes, the conspiracy theorists came running. Theories involving secret preservation chambers, time anomalies, or even aliens made their way onto Reddit and YouTube within hours of the story breaking. But for the team at the site? Silence. Shock. Awe. The Islamic community was immediately divided. Some scholars were outraged that the tomb was opened at all, calling it a violation of religious sanctity. Others, however, pointed to the discovery as evidence of Ali's deep spiritual connection and lifelong service to Islam. There is a long-standing belief in some Islamic traditions that certain individuals, martyrs, prophets, or deeply pious believers are protected from bodily decay as a sign of divine favor. While not mainstream, this belief is respected in some circles. Could Ali be one of them? A viral video from an imam in Cairo claimed, "The world called him the greatest, but God knew him as a servant." Perhaps this is a sign to remind us who he really was. Whether or not one believes in miracles, the timing and context are undeniably poetic. Ali, a man who defied death in the ring, who danced on the edge of political and social ruin for his beliefs, now seemed to be defying death once again, this time in the most literal sense. But what about the rumors themselves? What's really behind the stories of Ali's tomb being opened? And why do they capture our imagination so fiercely? Is there science to explain it? Or is it all just spirit and speculation? Science, spirit, and speculation. Where there's mystery, there's interpretation. And when that mystery involves Muhammad Ali, interpretations quickly take on mythic proportions. As the story of Ali's supposedly untouched tomb spread, from obscure Reddit threads to TikTok videos with millions of views, people started doing what they always do, trying to make sense of the impossible. Everyone had a theory. Depending on who you asked, Ali's preserved body was either the result of a rare natural phenomenon, a divine sign, or something out of a sci-fi thriller. The most grounded explanation came from the scientific community, or at least from a few experts who were willing to entertain the rumor without fully buying into it. A handful of forensic anthropologists weighed in online and in podcast interviews, speculating that if Ali's body really was unusually preserved, it might be due to a rare convergence of natural burial conditions. One anonymous source on a podcast called Behind the Veil suggested that certain types of soil, cool, dry, and oxygen-poor, could dramatically slow decomposition. Another theory pointed to the material of the coffin, proposing that specific metals or sealing techniques might have created an almost cryogenic effect. Still, all of them agreed, 9 years is a long time for a body to remain intact without embalming, and there are no documented cases quite like this. The science didn't rule it out completely, but it couldn't explain it either. Then came the spiritual interpretations. In Islamic tradition, there's a concept known as karama, extraordinary signs or miracles granted to righteous individuals. While mainstream Islamic scholars tend to discourage exalting graves or turning individuals into sacred symbols, historical accounts do speak of certain deeply pious people whose bodies remained untouched by decay. Could Ali be one of them? Some scholars thought it was possible. One imam, in a video that quickly went viral, said Ali suffered for what he believed. He gave up everything, his title, his wealth, even his health, to stand for truth. If Allah preserved his body, it wouldn't be because of his fists. It would be because of his sincerity. Others urged caution, warning that the legend could distract from Ali's real legacy, his humility, his faith, and his devotion to service. But while religious scholars debated, the theories kept multiplying. Some internet sleuths and amateur historians began speculating that something was buried with Ali, an object, a relic, something hidden. A few suggested he may have been buried with herbal compounds passed down through African traditions that are said to slow decay. Others floated ideas rooted in Islamic mysticism, claiming the involvement of ancient preservation practices long kept secret. More speculative voices asked whether Ali's international connections, particularly in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Nigeria, could have exposed him to spiritual or scientific methods unknown to the Western public. None of it could be proven, but that didn't seem to matter. The speculation only deepened the sense that something bigger might be at play. Naturally, the conspiracies came flooding in. One theory claimed that the US government had secretly opened the tomb under the guise of a scientific study, perhaps to test long-term burial conditions for future space missions. Another said the body was gone entirely, that the public grave was a decoy, and that Ali had been reburied in secret. One YouTuber, with dramatic music and slow zooms on grainy images, argued that Ali had been an angelic being, and that his body simply couldn't decay because it was never fully human. As ridiculous as some of these theories were, they reflected something true. People were still fascinated by Ali. Even in death, he was larger than life, and his story was still being written. What all of these interpretations had in common, from the spiritual to the scientific to the conspiratorial, was a desire to make sense of something that felt extraordinary. Whether or not Ali's tomb was ever opened didn't seem to matter as much as the idea that it could have been, that there was still something sacred, something mysterious, something unfinished about him. The speculation spoke more about us than about him. We want to believe that some people are too big, too important, too extraordinary to rot in the ground like everyone else. We want to believe they leave signs, that they linger. Ali's life already felt mythic. He refused to fight in Vietnam, lost his title, and became a symbol of resistance. He embraced Islam in a time when doing so made him a target. He battled Parkinson's for decades, shaking and silent, yet still powerful in the room. His very existence was a kind of miracle, not just for what he achieved in the ring, but for the convictions he refused to surrender. So when people hear a rumor that even his body defied decay, is it really that surprising they lean in? But who was Muhammad Ali when the cameras were off and the crowd noise faded? What kind of man lived behind the myth? And what shaped the soul that so many still feel drawn to, even in death? The man behind the mystery. Before Muhammad Ali became a myth, he was a boy from Louisville. Born Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. in 1942, he was loud, fast, and unapologetically proud, even before the world gave him a microphone. He found boxing almost by accident. A stolen bicycle and a police officer who happened to run a local gym, and from the moment he put on gloves, it was clear this kid wasn't just good. He was different. There was electricity in him. By 18, he had an Olympic gold medal. By 22, he'd taken the heavyweight title from Sonny Liston in one of the most stunning upsets in boxing history. But it wasn't just his fists that shocked people, it was his mouth. Ali didn't just predict victories, he performed them. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. wasn't just a line, it was a manifesto. He made boxing into theater, sport into spectacle, and the world couldn't take its eyes off him. But the showmanship was only one layer. Beneath the brash confidence was a man who was constantly evolving, constantly questioning, constantly pushing back. When he announced his conversion to Islam and joined the Nation of Islam in the mid-60s, many Americans recoiled. He changed his name, Muhammad Ali, and refused to answer to what he called his slave name. This was about more than religion. It was about identity, sovereignty, and self-definition. It was about control of his body, his mind, his story. Then came the draft. When Ali refused induction into the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War, citing religious and moral objections, the backlash was immediate and vicious. He was stripped of his title, banned from boxing, vilified in the press. People called him un-American, a coward, a traitor. But Ali never blinked. "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong," he said. "No Viet Cong ever called me the N-word." That single line spoke volumes. It was defiant. It was raw. And it was true. Ali was willing to lose everything: his career, his freedom, his money, to stand for something bigger than a belt. Eventually, the Supreme Court overturned his conviction. He returned to boxing. And somehow, he was even better. His trilogy with Joe Frazier, his stunning upset of George Foreman in the Rumble in the Jungle, his grueling war with Ken Norton, these fights weren't just physical battles. They were metaphors. Ali wasn't just fighting opponents. He was fighting the limits of the human body, the weight of public opinion, the expectations of what a black man in America could be. And still, he kept evolving. Later in life, Ali moved away from the Nation of Islam and embraced Sunni Islam, a shift from militancy to personal devotion. He traveled the world, met with presidents and kings, visited war zones, and spoke out for justice wherever he could. He grew quieter, more introspective. The once booming voice slowed as Parkinson's disease began its long siege. But even as his body betrayed him, Ali remained powerful. His presence was magnetic. When he lit the Olympic torch in 1996 with shaking hands, the world wept. Because it wasn't just about triumph anymore, it was about endurance, dignity, and grace under suffering. Ali's faith became his anchor. He prayed 5 times a day. He gave generously to charities, often anonymously. He studied the Quran and focused on serving others. In his final years, he wasn't chasing attention. He was preparing for death, for judgment, for something beyond the arena. When he died in 2016, it felt like the world paused. His funeral was like no other, a global, multi-faith, deeply human farewell. It featured imams, pastors, rabbis, and presidents, but it also featured childhood friends, fans, and everyday people who'd been touched by his words or his courage. He had planned it all himself: the speakers, the prayers, the message. He wanted it to be about unity, faith, and humility. He wanted to go out the same way he'd lived, on his own terms, but in service to something bigger than himself. And that's why the story of his preserved tomb, true or not, resonates so deeply. Because Ali was different. He did live by a code. He did give up comfort for principle. If there's one person you could imagine being protected from decay, one person whose spirit might bend the rules of nature, it would be him. Not because of magic, not because of superstition, but because of meaning. Ali's greatness wasn't just in his jab or his footwork. It was in his refusal to be controlled. He refused to be defined by white America, refused to be broken by prison, refused to be silenced by disease. He turned every hardship into a stage, every loss into a sermon. Even in his weakest physical state, he radiated a kind of strength that most athletes never touch, the strength of character, of purpose, of submission to something higher. So when people visit his grave and say they feel something, maybe they do. When they believe his body didn't decay, maybe it's less about biology and more about belief. In the end, whether the tomb was ever opened, whether anything strange was actually found, doesn't really matter. What matters is that Ali's legacy still refuses to lie still. He is gone, but not quiet, not forgotten, not finished. Because legends don't rot. They rise. A beast in the ring. Before Muhammad Ali was a symbol. Before he was a revolutionary. Before he became a myth whispered about in stories of miraculous tombs, he was a fighter. A beast in the ring. And not just any fighter, but the kind who made jaws drop, who rewrote the rules of heavyweight boxing, and who turned every match into a high-stakes drama of speed, power, and poetry. You could admire his principles and his politics, but to fully understand Ali, you've got to step into the ring with him, or at least try to imagine what that was like. Because inside the ropes, Ali wasn't just good. He was terrifyingly good. From the start, Ali broke the mold. Heavyweights were supposed to be slow and brutal, big punchers who marched forward and traded shots until someone fell. But Ali was fast. Not just fast for a heavyweight. He was fast, period. His hands moved like they were shot out of cannons. His feet never stopped dancing. He didn't plod. He floated. Opponents would lunge, miss, and suddenly find themselves spun around, confused, chasing shadows. And he was beautiful to watch. Ali treated boxing like performance art. He leaned on rhythm, footwork, angles, a sweet science that he made sweeter with every jab and every pivot. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee wasn't just a catchphrase, it was a fighting style. He'd glide across the canvas, luring his opponent in, hands low, head exposed. Then snap, a jab, a hook, a blur of motion that left his rivals swinging at air. Ali's early career was pure electricity. In 1964, he stunned the world by beating the seemingly invincible Sonny Liston to win the heavyweight title at just 22 years old. He danced, taunted, and then dismantled Liston, proving he wasn't just hype, he was a problem. In their rematch, he ended it with one of the most famous images in boxing history. Ali standing over Liston, fist cocked, yelling at him to get up. But what made Ali a true beast wasn't just his speed or style, it was his heart, his refusal to break. After his forced exile during the Vietnam draft saga, Ali returned to the ring not as a slick, undefeated showman, but as a hardened warrior with something to prove. He couldn't move like he used to. The years away had taken a toll, but he adapted. He developed a toughness and grit that stunned people who had thought he was all flash and no bite. That toughness defined the second half of his career. Think about the fight of the century against Joe Frazier in 1971, Ali's first professional loss. A brutal 15-round war against one of the most relentless pressure fighters the sport had ever seen. Ali got dropped, took heavy punishment, but never gave in. 2 more battles with Frazier followed, each nastier than the last. By the time of the Thrilla in Manila in 1975, the 2 men had pushed each other to the brink of death. In 100-degree heat, they tore into each other like gladiators. Ali later said it was the closest he'd ever come to dying. That's the part of Ali people sometimes forget. How much punishment he absorbed. How deep he could dig when the pretty footwork wasn't enough. He wasn't just a dancer. He was a dogged, iron-willed beast when it counted. His ability to take pain, to survive rounds that would have broken lesser fighters, is what made him legendary. Then there was the Rumble in the Jungle in 1974, maybe the greatest upset in boxing history. Ali versus George Foreman. Foreman was a monster, younger, stronger, undefeated, and fresh off demolishing Frazier in 2 rounds. No one gave Ali a chance. But Ali had a plan. He introduced the world to the now famous rope-a-dope strategy, leaning against the ropes, letting Foreman burn himself out while Ali absorbed shot after shot, all while whispering in his ear, taunting him. Then, in the 8th round, bang! A short flurry. Foreman was on the canvas. Ali was champion again. Genius, grit, and showmanship all rolled into one. That win wasn't just a comeback. It was proof that Ali was more than just speed and swagger. He was a master tactician, a strategist, a fighter who could evolve. And that evolution is part of what made him so terrifying. You couldn't pin him down. Even when you thought you had him, he had already figured out a new way to beat you. Ali's career stretched across 3 decades, 61 fights, 56 wins, 37 knockouts. But numbers don't capture it. It was the feeling of watching him fight, that buzzing sense that you were seeing something impossible. A big man moving like a lightweight, a showman delivering speeches mid-bout. A poet with fists. A man who could take the best shots in the world and still smile. Yes, later in his career, the toll became clear. His speech slowed. His hands trembled. The sport he loved had taken a terrible price. But that, too, became part of the legend. He had given everything, his body, his youth, his strength, for his craft. And people respected him not just because he was the best, but because he proved it over and over again under impossible pressure. Ali wasn't flawless in the ring. He lost fights, took damage, made mistakes. But he never quit, never backed down. And in the end, that mattered more than any perfect record. He wasn't just a champion. He was the champion. A beast with brains, bravery, and brilliance. The kind of fighter who comes around once in a century, if that. And to this day, ask any boxer who they wanted to be growing up, and odds are the answer comes fast, with a smile. Ali. More than a boxer. Muhammad Ali wasn't just a boxer. Sure, his lightning-fast punches and dazzling footwork made him one of the greatest athletes the world has ever seen. But what truly set Ali apart was how he used his platform, his fame, his voice, and his unmistakable charisma to become a cultural icon and a social revolutionary whose influence reached far beyond the ring. His impact rippled through the civil rights movement, challenged political power structures, reshaped how athletes engage with society, and sparked a new sense of pride and identity in Black communities worldwide. Ali's impact was cultural. His style, which is flashy, poetic, theatrical, redefined what it meant to be a professional athlete. Before Ali, boxers were often seen as silent, grim-faced warriors. Ali made boxing into performance art, mixing in rhyme and rhythm. His larger-than-life personality brought fans in droves and transformed the sport's popularity worldwide. He wasn't just a fighter, he was an entertainer, a poet, and a cultural phenomenon. His influence also helped change the role of athletes in society. Today, sports figures like LeBron James and Colin Kaepernick use their platforms to speak on social issues. That model of athletes as activists can be traced back directly to Ali. He proved that being a champion means more than winning trophies. It means standing up for what's right, even if it costs you everything. Ali's global identity was another part of his cultural power. While he was rooted in the African-American experience, his travels and faith connected him to a worldwide audience. He embraced his role as a global ambassador of peace and unity. His visits to countries often ignored by mainstream media, like Iraq, North Korea, and Cuba, were acts of diplomacy, challenging Cold War narratives and showing the world a different kind of leadership. Moreover, Ali's impact on Black identity and pride was profound. At a time when Black people were fighting for dignity and equality, Ali showed a new model of Black masculinity, confident, articulate, unapologetic, and deeply proud of his heritage. His famous declaration, "I am America," flipped the script on exclusion. He said, in essence, "I belong here. I am part of this country's story." That message empowered generations who felt marginalized. The ripple effects of Ali's influence can still be felt today. His life inspired musicians, writers, filmmakers, and activists. Songs were written about him. Documentaries and films have immortalized his story. Schools, streets, and parks have been named after him around the world. He became a symbol not just of athletic prowess, but of the ongoing struggle for justice and equality. But Ali's story wasn't all praise and glory. He took heavy hits outside the ring to the legend that won't stay buried. 9 years after Muhammad Ali's death, his name still floats through the world like a breeze that refuses to settle. He's not just remembered, he's felt. In every underdog who dares to speak back, in every protester who says no when the pressure says yes, in every athlete who decides that their voice matters as much as their performance. Ali gave people permission to stand tall, not just in the ring, but in life. So when rumors surfaced that his tomb had been opened and that something extraordinary had been discovered inside, it was no surprise that people listened. Not because they believe everything they hear, but because some part of them wants to believe that a man like Ali couldn't simply disappear into the dirt like the rest of us. That maybe, just maybe, death couldn't pin him down either. But the truth is, Ali never needed a miracle to be immortal. His life was the miracle. He was a poor Black kid from Kentucky who talked his way into legend, who took on the government, the media, the boxing world, and disease, and never once backed down from himself. He was full of contradictions, fierce yet kind, boastful yet humble, devout yet rebellious. He was a fighter who hated war, a champion who gave up everything, a man of faith who never stopped evolving. You can't bury that. You can't close a lid on it, and you certainly can't silence it with time. That's why, whether the tomb was opened or not, people are still asking questions, still drawn to his grave like it holds answers, still passing around stories, speculations, theories, all of it pointing to a deeper truth. That Ali's impact wasn't confined to his era. He still disrupts. He still demands interpretation. And maybe that's the real reason the legend won't stay buried. Because he still matters. Maybe the tomb is sealed forever. Maybe nothing extraordinary ever happened there. Or maybe something did. Not something physical, but spiritual. Maybe the real miracle is that, even in death, Ali still sparks movement, still shakes the system, still floats above it all. Call it myth, call it memory, call it mystery. But whatever you call it, Don't call it over. Muhammad Ali told us exactly who he was. I am the greatest. I said that even before I knew I was. Now the world keeps repeating it, not because he demanded it, but because somehow he proved it. The body is gone. The story is not. The legend keeps punching. We'd love to hear your thoughts below. Thanks for watching this video. Subscribe to the channel for more.